The train. In Final Destination, a group of teenagers escapes a plane explosion after Alex has a premonition, but death starts hunting down the survivors in the exact order they were supposed to die, and the train scene is one of the most intense moments in the movie. After completely losing it, Carter decides to park his car right on the train tracks to challenge death itself. The problem is that the car gets stuck just as a train starts speeding toward them. With only seconds left before impact, Alex runs to the car and pulls Carter out at the very last second. For one moment, it feels like they finally broke the cycle. But death doesn't stop, and the next person on the list was Billy Hitchcock. The electricity. Near the end of Final Destination, Alex, Clear, and Carter believe they finally managed to break Death's cycle. But before that, the movie delivers a completely chaotic sequence involving fire, electricity, and multiple accidents happening all at once. First, Alex barely escapes death himself. Then, Clear becomes trapped inside a car when a high-voltage power line falls onto the vehicle. Unable to get out, she watches the situation grow worse by the second as Alex desperately searches for a way to save her. But the danger is far from over, and then things get even worse. The wires start whipping across the ground, throwing sparks everywhere, while gasoline leaking near the car turns the entire scene into a ticking time bomb. Alex realizes Clear is about to die, so he makes a completely desperate decision, grabbing the live wire to pull it away from the car. Alex is thrown far away by the explosion, but he survives. And for a few months, it actually seems like everything worked out. The sign. At the end of Final Destination, Alex, Clear, and Carter are already in Paris trying to believe they finally escaped Death's plan. After everything that happened in the movie, the three of them try acting like life has finally returned to normal. But this franchise absolutely loves making the audience lower their guard before destroying every feeling of safety. While they're talking near a busy street, a bus loses control and crashes into a pole. The impact snaps the support cables of a massive sign attached to the building nearby. And then the chaos begins. The giant sign swings like a pendulum directly toward Alex. Carter notices the danger at the very last second and shoves Alex out of the way, saving his life once again. For one moment, it feels like that classic movie ending where the hero finally defeats fate. Except Final Destination doesn't work like that. Right after saving Alex, Carter starts asking, who's next? And at that exact moment, the sign violently swings back toward him. The movie cuts away before showing the full impact, but it's obvious what happened. And even after escaping here, Alex later dies off screen in the second movie after being hit by a brick. As for Clear Rivers, she doesn't last much longer either, but we'll talk about that soon. The plastic fish. In Final Destination 2, Tim is a kid who escaped the massive highway accident thanks to Kimberly's premonition. Afterward, Death starts hunting down all the survivors in the new order of the disaster, and his turn comes during what should have been a completely normal trip to the dentist, which is already terrifying enough for a lot of people. While Tim lies in the chair under laughing gas, the movie starts stacking small dangers everywhere. There are sharp tools near his face, a pigeon trapped outside hitting the window, toys swinging above the chair. Everything makes the audience think an extremely painful death is about to happen, and then a plastic fish suddenly falls directly into Tim's mouth, causing him to choke while barely being able to move. Looks like the end, right? Nope. One of the assistants rushes in, removes the object, and manages to save him. But unfortunately, he only escaped for a few more minutes, because once outside, Tim runs toward a group of pigeons trying to scare them away. The noise startles a nearby crane operator who accidentally drops a massive glass panel directly onto Tim, instantly killing him. And the genius part of the scene is the misdirection. The movie makes you paranoid about the entire dentist office while the real death was waiting outside the whole time. The gun won't fire. In Final Destination 2, Eugene Dix is one of the characters who completely mentally breaks down after the highway accident. Unlike the other survivors still trying to understand death's rules, Eugene simply accepts that he's doomed. The guy witnesses one horrifying death after another and eventually reaches a point where he'd rather choose his own ending. And that's when one of the strangest scenes in the franchise happens. Eugene grabs a loaded gun and tries to kill himself, but when he pulls the trigger, nothing happens. He tries again and again. The gun simply refuses to fire. The weirdest part is that the gun is actually loaded. It's not user error. The movie makes it very clear that this is happening because it's not his turn on death's list yet, and the almost ironic tone of the scene makes it even more uncomfortable. Because while Eugene is trying to escape the suffering quickly, the movie basically shows that he's being saved for something even worse later on. Later, when his turn finally arrives, Eugene dies during a chaotic sequence involving hospital oxygen tanks and an explosion, which is also when Clear from the first movie dies. The explosion. Rory Peters' sequence is already completely chaotic because of the gigantic explosion and the famous barbed wire fence. But in the middle of that disaster, another important moment happens that a lot of people forget. The instant Officer Thomas Burke gets saved purely by reflex. It all happens seconds before Rory's death when a branch suddenly falls, causing the officer to throw himself to the ground. Immediately afterward, an explosion erupts and part of the barbed wire fence slides straight through Rory, meaning that if the officer hadn't instinctively dropped to the ground, he would have died too. The rebirth. At the end of Final Destination 2, Kimberly Corman finally discovers a possible way to interrupt Death's plan. After the massive highway crash, she realizes that all the survivors are dying in a specific order, just like in the first movie. But this time there's a different clue involving the phrase new life. For most of the movie, Kimberly and the others believe it refers to Isabella's baby, a pregnant woman also connected to the accident. The idea seems simple: if a new life enters the world, maybe the cycle will break. But Kimberly eventually discovers something important. Isabella was never supposed to die in that accident, meaning she was never part of Death's list, and that's when Kimberly makes a completely desperate decision. She realizes the only possible new life has to come from herself, so Kimberly intentionally drives the van into a lake. Thomas Burke manages to rescue her, but she suffers cardiac arrest at the hospital. For a few moments, Kimberly literally dies and then comes back. Dr. Kalarjian successfully revives her, perfectly fulfilling the vision Kimberly had earlier. Technically, she died and was reborn, temporarily breaking Death's cycle. But Final Destination never ends peacefully. Sometime later, Kimberly and Thomas appear at a barbecue trying to move on with their lives. For the first time, everything actually feels calm, until the movie hints that Death probably still hasn't finished the job. The barbecue. Still in the same movie, one of the cruelest rules in the franchise appears through a character who wasn't even part of the main survivor group, Brian Gibbons. It all starts after the accident where Eugene gets taken to the hospital. During the chaos, a news van loses control and almost violently runs Brian over, but Rory saves him at the very last second. It feels like a tiny detail in the scene, but that moment secretly places Brian onto Death's list without anyone realizing it. In the final scene, the movie shows the survivors gathered at what seems like a peaceful barbecue, almost like a happy ending. During the conversation, Brian's parents casually mention how Rory saved him during the farm accident, and instantly Kimberly and Burke realize the truth at the same time. Brian was never safe. Before they can warn anyone, the kid walks toward the grill, and seconds later, a sudden explosion brutally ends the movie. The drive-thru. In Final Destination 3, Wendy and Kevin spend the entire movie trying to prevent the deaths predicted after the roller coaster accident, and one of the most intense sequences happens at a drive-thru line. While waiting for their order inside the car, Wendy notices something strange through the rear window. A truck has lost control and is speeding directly toward them. And even worse, Frankie Cheeks' car is stopped right in front of them, completely blocking the exit. Wendy instantly panics while Kevin desperately honks and screams for Frankie to move the car, but it's useless. And then comes one of the most desperate parts of the scene. Unable to open the doors, Kevin starts kicking the windshield until the entire glass shatters. He pushes Wendy through the opening and jumps out right after her, escaping literally at the very last millisecond before impact. But Frankie isn't nearly as lucky. The hardware store. Wendy starts realizing that the photos taken before the roller coaster accident contain clues about how each survivor is going to die, and one of the strangest images involves Ian McKinley standing next to his girlfriend Erin. When Wendy connects the signs, she rushes to warn Ian and Erin about their fates, trying to stop the next death on the list. They're inside a hardware store, and the place feels like the perfect setting for Death to strike, with dangerous tools and objects everywhere. The original target there was Ian. Wendy notices several wooden beams beginning to slide dangerously off one of the shelves. At the very last second, she manages to shove Ian out of the way before the entire structure collapses exactly where he was standing. And for a few seconds, it feels like she finally beat Death. But shortly afterward, Death's focus instantly shifts to Erin. She trips and falls directly into the weapon's path while the tool repeatedly fires on its own. Wendy saves Ian, only to realize seconds later that she simply pushed Death onto the person standing beside him. And after his girlfriend dies, Ian completely loses his mind. He starts blaming Wendy for everything and becomes obsessed with the idea that she somehow attracts death to the people around her. And that all explodes during the town fair sequence. While Wendy desperately tries to save Julie and Kevin, Ian shows up in the middle of the chaos, practically wanting to watch Wendy die. Things get even worse when several fireworks suddenly start launching randomly throughout the park after a fire breaks out. The fireworks start flying toward them, and Wendy barely manages to throw herself to the ground in time. Ian also narrowly survives the explosions, and then comes the most ironic moment of the scene. After surviving, Ian believes he finally beat Death, but this is Final Destination. While he celebrates, the fireworks continue exploding inside a massive structure behind him. Within seconds, the entire thing starts collapsing. And yeah, he definitely didn't escape death after all. The horse. Near the end of the movie, everything starts during the city's tricentennial celebration, filled with fireworks, animals, and machinery spread all over the fairgrounds. Like always in the franchise, one tiny detail turns into a ridiculous domino effect. The fireworks scare a nearby horse, which suddenly bolts through the crowd in panic. The problem is that Julie gets tangled in a rope attached to the animal. Within seconds, she starts getting violently dragged across the ground without being able to free herself, and the movie makes sure to increase the tension by showing exactly where she's headed. A farming machine covered in giant metal spikes. The entire sequence turns into a race against time. Kevin runs after her trying to reach the rope before she's pulled straight into the spikes, and at the very last second he manages to cut the rope, saving Julie by inches. But as everyone learns in Final Destination, surviving once doesn't mean much. Months later on the subway, Wendy is with her roommate Laura and her friend Sean when she reunites with Julie and Kevin. The problem is that Wendy suddenly has another premonition involving a violent train derailment where all of them die. Once the vision ends, they try stopping the train, but it's already too late, meaning they survived for a while, but death never forgot about them. The car wash. In the Final Destination 4, Janet Cunningham already knows she's marked by death after surviving the racetrack disaster. So the moment she enters an automatic car wash, the atmosphere immediately feels wrong. Everything begins when a short circuit happens. The malfunction causes Janet's car to stop right in the middle of the tunnel, while all the machines around her continue operating normally. From there, the panic only gets worse. Janet tries opening the doors, but the electronic locks fail. The windows stop responding too. And as if things weren't already bad enough, the car's sunroof suddenly starts opening on its own. Water and soap begin flooding into the vehicle while Janet desperately tries closing the roof with her bare hands. But the worst part comes right after that. The giant rotating brushes start moving again and begin descending directly onto the car. Janet sticks her head out through the sunroof, trying to scream for help, but the brushes come directly toward her. At the very last second, Nick and Lori arrive at the location. Nick crashes his car through the tunnel entrance and manages to pull Janet forward just seconds before she's hit. The escalator. Still in the fourth movie, Nick believes he finally escaped death's cycle after the racetrack disaster. But near the end of the film, another tragedy is about to happen, this time inside a shopping mall under construction. And that's when one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the franchise happens, the escalator sequence. Everything starts when Nick notices strange signs inside the mall. An explosion happens in a nearby store because of flammable construction materials, and chaos quickly spreads throughout the building. In the middle of the panic, Lori is riding down the escalator when one of the steps suddenly collapses. Her body slowly starts getting pulled into the mechanism while Nick desperately tries holding onto her, but her leg gets trapped and little by little she's dragged further inside. The entire scene plays on a fear that a lot of people already have while using escalators, imagining what's hidden inside that machine. But this entire sequence actually happens inside Nick's vision. He realizes death still hasn't finished the job and wakes up in time to stop the mall explosion, temporarily saving Lori and Janet. They escaped, at least for a while. 2 weeks later, Nick, Lori, and Janet meet at a cafe when he suddenly realizes death is still following them. And then, out of nowhere, a truck crashes into the place and kills all three of them. False hope. Final Destination 5 introduced one of the cruelest rules in the franchise. To cheat death, someone has to kill another person and steal their remaining lifespan. For most of the movie, Nathan Sears believes he successfully did exactly that after accidentally killing his co-worker Roy at the factory where they worked. Because it happened indirectly, Nathan starts believing he inherited Roy's years of life and finally escaped death's list. And for a while, it really seems like it worked. While the other survivors keep dying one by one, Nathan stays alive and apparently free from the supernatural curse. But everything changes near the end of the movie. He's sitting inside a bar tending a memorial for Roy, and then comes the revelation that completely destroys his hope. One of the coworkers casually mentions that Roy had a severe brain aneurysm and could have died at any moment even without the accident, meaning Nathan didn't inherit decades of life. He inherited only a few days, and just like every Final Destination movie loves to do, the punishment arrives immediately. Seconds after the revelation, a turbine from Flight 180 crashes onto the bar and kills Nathan instantly, the first survivor. Final Destination. Bloodlines begins with Iris Campbell, the grandmother of Stefani, the movie's main character. Back in the 1960s, Iris experienced what would become the very first major premonition in the franchise timeline. During the grand opening of a massive restaurant at the top of the Skyview Tower, she foresees a catastrophic disaster involving explosions, fires, and the total collapse of the structure. Thanks to her panic, the disaster is completely prevented. The problem is that by saving all those people at once, Iris created entire generations of descendants who were never supposed to exist. Decades later, death finally decides to correct that mistake. That's when Stefani begins having violent visions and realizes her own family has become the target. When she finally finds Iris as an old woman, she discovers her grandmother spent her entire life hidden away in a cabin that's practically become a fortress. The house is filled with escape routes and improvised safety measures to prevent accidents. Iris lives in constant paranoia because she knows death never stopped hunting her, but eventually she realizes she can't run forever. To prove everything is real, Iris steps outside the protected area of the cabin for only a few seconds, and that's more than enough for death to strike. But maybe the biggest revelation comes right after that. Iris was the person responsible for saving a young boy named JB during the tower disaster. That boy grows up to become William Bloodworth.
William John Bloodworth. but my friends call me JB.
The franchise's most mysterious character, a funeral director who has appeared since the first movie and understands death's rules better than anyone, constantly helping the protagonist understand what's happening. The bastard son. In the same movie, we also have Eric Campbell. From the very beginning, everything points toward him becoming one of the next victims of the family curse, and the movie turns that idea into one of the most intense sequences in the franchise. Alone inside a tattoo studio, Eric tries distracting himself by getting tattooed, while the entire environment around him slowly turns into a ticking time bomb. The camera keeps focusing on every dangerous object, as if literally anything could kill him at any second, and then the chaos starts. After a ridiculous chain of coincidences, flammable liquid spills across the floor. Moments later, Eric's piercing gets caught in a chain hanging from the ceiling, which starts spinning with the fan. Everything catches on fire. Eric falls to the ground surrounded by flames, and seconds later a small explosion happens. Then the scene suddenly cuts away, making everyone believe he finally died. Except he didn't. Minutes later, the movie reveals that Eric survived almost completely unharmed. And then comes one of the biggest twists in the story. His mother admits Eric was the result of an affair, meaning he doesn't actually share the cursed bloodline of Iris's family. Technically, he was never on death's list. The cruelest part is that the relief doesn't last long. Even free from the curse, Eric keeps trying to help the other survivors and eventually ends up on death's radar anyway. Inside a hospital, an MRI machine suddenly starts violently pulling metal objects across the room. And one of the victims is Eric himself, who dies in an absolutely grotesque way. The fake death. The ending of Final Destination Bloodlines does exactly what this franchise loves doing most, completely destroying any feeling of hope. Stephanie and Charlie are the movie's only survivors. The two of them believe they finally managed to break death's design for good, and for a moment, it really feels like they did. Earlier in the movie, Stephanie drowns during a terrible accident. Charlie manages to save his sister at the very last second and performs CPR on her until she starts breathing again. From that point on, the two believe they found the ultimate solution. In their minds, Stephanie died and came back to life, interrupting death's design the same way it happened in Final Destination 2. But Final Destination slowly sets up its final trap. During graduation, a doctor reveals that Stephanie was never clinically dead. She had only lost consciousness, meaning the cycle was never broken at all. An old coin connected to the beginning of the curse ends up falling onto a railroad track. It looks like a tiny, harmless detail until the coin jams part of the track exactly as a train speeds by. The derailment starts instantly. Stephanie and Charlie run in complete panic, while train cars tear through the neighborhood, destroying everything in their path. And the worst part is that they actually survive the main crash. The two dodge the debris and manage to stay away from the train while it slows down. But then comes the classic Final Destination fake-out ending. When the train comes to a stop, the impact sends massive logs flying, crushing them. Yeah, 6 movies and very few survivors. As we saw, some of them escaped for a while, gained weeks or even months of extra life, but death never forgot about them. On screen right now is a video where we explain every opening disaster in the franchise. Click and watch. See you there.